A major development just hit around Sheryl Swoopes, and it could ripple straight into the way the Caitlin Clark conversation has been playing out across the WNBA world. Because this time, it is not a trending argument or a social media clip. It is a professional consequence. Reports circulating say Swoopes has been let go again. And the reason this is catching fire is because people who have followed her coaching history is pointing to a familiar arc. When a public figure builds a reputation around criticism, conflict, and repeated friction with players or narratives, eventually the spotlight stops being optional. It turns into accountability. What makes this moment feel bigger than one person losing a job is the timing. The league is in a new era where the biggest stars are not just athletes, they are full-scale media economies. Caitlin Clark is the center of that shift, and every major voice that chooses to lean into controversy around her ends up shaping how fans see the WNBA itself. That is why Swoopes has become such a lightning rod. For a lot of fans, her comments have not felt like normal analysis. They have felt personal, repetitive, and targeted. The kind of messaging that doesn't just critique a player, but questions why the player is being celebrated at all. Now, zoom out. People are also bringing up what happened years ago at Loyola University Chicago, where complaints reportedly grew loud enough that the school had to step in and investigate what was happening inside the program. Players described a tense environment, with emotions running high and moments that felt more chaotic than constructive. Whether you see that as an unfair pile-on or as a pattern repeating itself depends on what you believe leadership should look like when pressure hits. Either way, this is the part that matters for the league. The WNBA is trying to grow into its next phase, and growth magnifies everything. The stars, the critics, the internal politics, and the cultural divide between old guard and new wave. If you're going to break a record, to me, if it's legitimate, you have to break that record in the same amount of time that that player set it. Okay, so if Kelsey Plum set that record in 4 years, well, Caitlin should have broke that record in 4 years. But because there's a co-year and then there's another year, you know what I mean? So she's already had an extra year to break that record. So is it truly a broken record? Yeah, that'll go in the record books as Caitlin Clark is the all-time whatever it is. I don't even know what the number is, but that's the way it'll be. And I don't think it should be. When a prominent legend becomes publicly tied to controversy and consequence at the same time the league is fighting to control its public image, it forces a bigger question. Is the WNBA going to protect the momentum around its new generation, or keep allowing side battles to hijack the story? Drop your take in the comments. Do you think Sheryl Swoopes is being held accountable, or do you think she is being scapegoated because the Caitlin Clark era has made everything louder? Back at Loyola University Chicago, the stories that surfaced weren't about a coach simply demanding more effort. The complaints described a tense environment, with emotions running high and moments that felt more chaotic than constructive. Whether you see that as an unfair pile-on or as a pattern repeating itself depends on what you believe leadership should look like when pressure hits. Either way, this is the part that matters for the league. The WNBA is trying to grow into its next phase, and growth magnifies everything. The stars, the critics, the internal politics, and the cultural divide between old guard and new wave. Creating distrust inside a locker room that already felt unstable. One situation that drew particular attention involved a former player, Lauren Hibbard. According to the allegations that circulated around the program, Swoopes pushed her to sign a medical hardship form after knee injuries with the idea that she would still be connected to the team through a role that included travel and involvement. The problem, according to those claims, is that what was implied never became reality. For the player, it felt like a promise made in a vulnerable moment that wasn't honored once the paperwork was signed. By the time the situation reached the university's leadership, the patience was gone. In July 2016, Loyola's athletic director, Steve Watson, terminated Swoopes, and the school announced she would no longer serve as the women's basketball head coach. The investigation reportedly did not find claims of physical abuse or NCAA rules violations, but the university concluded the behavior described still crossed a line that could not be ignored. And that's where the quote that keeps resurfacing hits so hard. Former player Kate Soines captured the frustration in a way that stuck with people, saying Swoopes was like the Michael Jordan of women's basketball, but didn't know how to teach. The point wasn't to deny her greatness as a player, it was to underline the gap between being legendary and being able to develop others without turning the environment into constant tension. Now, here's the key. The Loyola story doesn't just sit in the past as a random scandal. It becomes a blueprint for how certain patterns show up again later, especially once Swoopes re-entered the spotlight in 2024 and 2025. This time, not as a coach, but as a public voice in the Caitlin Clark era. The turning point came when Sheryl Swoopes left the sideline and stepped into the media space, because the same leadership flaws people said they experienced in a gym environment started showing up again in a much louder arena, broadcasting. The difference is that a locker room can be isolated, a studio cannot. Once you say something on a microphone, it doesn't stay between you and a team. It becomes a headline, a clip, a debate segment, a comment war. Well, I mean, if you want to talk about bullies, we can talk about each time Caitlin has the ball she pushes off. Oh, no. I'm just like, but she has that advantage. Sheryl Swoopes begs WNBA fans to, and that's why so many fans started drawing connections to the earlier pattern. The claims from her coaching era were about pressure, control, and creating instability inside a program. In the media era, that energy didn't disappear, it just changed shape. It showed up as recurring dismissal, constant skepticism, and a tone that felt less like analysis and more like a personal mission. She averaged 31.6, 7.4 rebounds, 9 assists. Right? Did anyone expect her to do that in W? No. Right? So she didn't do that. No. Now, if we say her stats are today, 20 points, 8.4 assists, 6 rebounds, that's crazy, but dominant. But to me, that's not dominating. Yeah, it's only not dominating because she's a rookie. Now, if she's putting up numbers like Asia right now, would she? Whose highlights traveled faster than official marketing, and whose fan base did not treat criticism like casual debate. They treated it like a challenge. So when Swoopes leaned into narratives that fans believed were inaccurate or misleading, it didn't land like normal sports talk. It landed like a campaign. To Clark supporters, it felt like the goal wasn't to break down strengths and weaknesses, but to minimize the legitimacy of what she had accomplished. Records became overhyped, milestones became manufactured, praise became media-driven, and whether Swoopes intended it that way or not, the repetition made it feel deliberate. Also talk about how much more experience that gives you over other players coming in, right? So people say, dang, like he or she's killing them, but you have a 25-year-old playing against a 20-year-old. Like you should be killing them. Yeah, because you've been doing it a lot longer than they have. Online, the reaction became automatic. Anytime Sheryl Swoopes' name entered a Caitlin Clark discussion, the comments didn't treat it like a normal debate. They treated it like another chapter in an ongoing feud. And that matters because once the audience starts expecting bias, the commentary stops carrying authority. It becomes entertainment, and not in a good way. Then something changed that made the situation feel less like internet noise and more like a real professional line being drawn. During the 2024 season, Swoopes did not appear on at least one Dallas Wings broadcast when Indiana and Caitlin Clark came to town, which drew immediate attention because of the existing controversy. After that, the bigger signal came in the next cycle, when Dallas's local broadcast crew was discussed for 2025. Multiple reporting and industry roundups listed the Wings' on-air team without Swoopes included, a notable shift from the 2024 announcement that added her. The key point is not whether any single game absence was the moment, it's the way the arc looked from the outside. A Hall of Famer becomes a recurring controversy in the league's biggest storyline. The audience stops trusting the intent behind the commentary, and eventually the opportunities around that commentary start narrowing. At that point, it stops being about one player, one fan base, or one clip. It becomes a reminder that women's basketball is too visible now for personalities to survive on feud energy without consequences showing up somewhere. As the new season approached, the shift didn't look loud or dramatic. It looked quiet and coordinated. Broadcast teams started getting announced, graphics went up, press releases rolled out, and one name kept not showing up, not just on the games tied to Caitlyn, but across the board. To fans who had been tracking the controversy, it felt like the league wasn't interested in another headline cycle. They were interested in moving on. Hey, rising tide lifts all boats. Whatever it takes for everybody to get said, I'm all for it. You a WNBA player, Caitlyn Clark gonna get you paid. I'd figure out a way to be her friend. And that's how it appeared to happen, not with a single statement, but with a slow disappearance, one role at a time, one appearance at a time, until the pattern became impossible to miss. The segments stopped, the mentions stopped, the opportunities dried up. People didn't need an official announcement to understand the message. The silence was the announcement. The contrast only made it sharper. Nancy Lieberman, the same respected legend who had publicly pushed back on the misinformation and defended the importance of getting the facts right, remained in place. In the public's eyes, it created a clean split screen. One voice kept her seat because she sounded like someone building the game. The other started losing her platform because she sounded like someone fighting the moment the sport was trying to embrace. Then came the part that made the whole thing feel like a scramble. After months of criticism and tension, Swoopes suddenly reappeared in a different tone, offering praise for Clark and the Indiana Fever, talking about roster construction, chemistry, and how the pieces were starting to fit. The message was polished, it sounded supportive, it sounded almost like a reset. But by then, fans weren't hearing it as a change of heart, they were hearing it as a reaction to consequences. The timing was what made it land the way it did. When someone spends months questioning a player's legitimacy and then flips into compliments right after their access appears to shrink, the audience doesn't treat it like growth. They treat it like damage control. That's why the online reaction turned instantly sarcastic. People didn't debate whether the Fever had improved. They joked about the sudden shift, like the praise had been found at the exact moment it became necessary. The same fans who had spent a year auditing every comment were now reading the compliments like a PR move, not a basketball opinion. And in a league this visible now, perception is its own scoreboard. Once the audience decides you're not speaking in good faith, even your compliments get treated like strategy, not support. The whiplash is what made people stop giving her the benefit of the doubt. After months of pushing narratives that Clark supporters saw as inaccurate, Sheryl Swoopes suddenly started speaking in a tone that sounded supportive.
Not subtly, either. It came across like a full pivot, the kind that reads less like a change of opinion and more like someone trying to get back in the room after the door has already started closing. That's why the reaction felt so unified. Even people who don't normally defend Caitlyn Clark could see the timing. When the praise shows up right after your opportunities appear to shrink, the audience doesn't treat it as growth, they treat it as survival. And by then, major personalities had already put the possibility on Front Street. Stephen A. Smith publicly floated the idea that personal animosity toward Clark had become a professional problem, implying that the controversy wasn't just annoying, it was turning into a broadcast liability. 4 WNBA championships. You know basketball. You know basketball better than me. To a league that is trying to protect its momentum, that kind of heat isn't worth it. Not when the same storyline keeps reappearing, and not when it revolves around the most watched player the league has had in years. So the arc looked brutal. Swoopes went from being one of the loudest voices attached to women's basketball coverage to being a name fans associated with controversy more than analysis. Meanwhile, the analyst who challenged misinformation and emphasized facts, Nancy Lieberman, remained visible and employed. Whether people think that's fair or not, the symbolism was obvious. One approach aged well, the other got isolated. But while all of that noise was consuming the internet, Indiana was doing something that matters more than any talk show segment. They were building. Because the Caitlyn Clark era isn't just hype anymore, it's structure. The Fever's growth has been about putting complementary pieces around her, not asking her to do everything. Aaliyah Boston gives Indiana a reliable interior anchor, and the more reps she gets with Clark, the more dangerous that connection becomes. When a big can finish, pass, and read angles, Clark's playmaking stops being a highlight reel and becomes a system. The action doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to be consistent, and when the timing is right, it's a nightmare to guard. Then you add Kelsey Mitchell, who gives Indiana the one thing that separates promising teams from playoff teams, a second scorer who can create a bucket when the defense sells out to stop the primary star. That changes the math. You can't trap Clark freely if Mitchell is ready to punish rotations. And around that core, the role players start to matter in a way casual fans overlook. You need shooting that holds defenders accountable. You need perimeter defenders who can switch, fight through screens, and cover for mistakes. You need players who don't need touches to stay locked in. When those pieces fit, Clark doesn't just elevate a roster, she accelerates it. So while Swoopes was trying to talk her way back into relevance, the Fever were quietly creating the kind of balance that turns attention into wins. And if Indiana makes a real run, this entire saga is going to look even more one-sided in hindsight, because nothing ends a debate faster than a team that starts cashing in on the court. The funniest part about how this played out is that the very player Sheryl Swoopes spent so much time trying to reduce into a gimmick is now being treated as something far bigger than a viral moment. Caitlin Clark is being recognized by the league, by the media, and by the market as a true driver of change, not just a star, a shift. Because when a player warps the defense the way Clark does, she changes the geometry of the entire game. The moment she crosses half court, you can see the panic. Defenders pick up earlier, help defenders shade higher, rotations start sooner, and every inch of that attention creates space for someone else. That's why her impact is bigger than her stat line. She creates opportunities that didn't exist before she arrived. And what makes Indiana dangerous now is that the roster around her is finally built like a contender instead of a development project. Clark is coming into her third season with real support, real chemistry, and real scars from the postseason. Those 2024 and 2025 playoff runs weren't just experiences, they were lessons. The Fever learned what every young team has to learn the hard way, that in playoff basketball, the margin is brutal. One missed box out, one empty possession, one late rotation. That's the difference between advancing and going home. Aaliyah Boston has talked about that feeling before.
The sense that they were closer than people think, and that closeness is what flips a team from happy to be here to we're coming for this. When a young core tastes how tight the postseason is, it doesn't usually make them timid. It makes them obsessed with details. So while the outside world was arguing about narratives, Indiana was stacking reps. Boston and Clark are building timing that can't be coached overnight. The connections get sharper, the reads get faster, the truss gets louder. Kelsey Mitchell stays the pressure release valve, the scorer who prevents defenses from making Clark the only equation. Add in the shooting and defensive versatility from players like Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull, and suddenly Indiana isn't a fun story, they are a problem. And that's the part that makes the criticism look small now, because the cleanest way to answer years of noise is with wins. If Indiana pushes deep and legitimately threatens for a title, there is no argument left to have. The debate ends the moment the scoreboard starts validating the foundation. That's why this moment feels like a turning of the page for the league. The WNBA is stepping into a new era where the biggest storylines are too valuable to be dragged down by commentary that feels personal, sloppy, or agenda-driven. Whether people like Caitlin Clark or not, the league knows what she represents: attention, revenue, growth, and a new generation of fans who are not going anywhere. And the real winners in all of this are the fans. Because instead of watching the sport get pulled into constant bitterness, they get to watch what actually matters. Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hull, and a Fever team that is no longer asking for respect. They are preparing to take it. It always ends the same way when someone mistakes bitterness for authority. You can ride controversy for a while. You can build a brand off side eyes and slick takes. But eventually, the sport moves forward, and it leaves the loudest critics behind if they can't adapt to what the moment demands. That's what this saga really exposed. This was never just about one analyst saying something wrong. It was about a pattern of framing the league's biggest rising force like she was a problem instead of an opportunity. A pattern of turning milestones into arguments, success into suspicion, and momentum into something that had to be cut down before it got too big. But the Caitlin Clark era didn't shrink, it expanded. And the more it expanded, the more the league had to decide what it wanted to protect. Because if your most watched games, your most discussed highlights, and your fastest growing fan base are built around a new wave of stars, then you don't get to let petty narratives poison that. Well, not anymore. Not in a league that's finally too visible to keep tolerating voices that feel like they're rooting against its own growth. The irony is that the loudest attempts to diminish Clark only made the spotlight brighter. Every time the noise got nastier, the fan base got louder.
Every time the criticism got more personal, the support got more organized. And while the internet was fighting about takes, Indiana was building a real foundation: chemistry, timing, trust, postseason scars, the kind of details that don't show up in viral clips but decide championships. Now, the league is watching the same thing the fans are watching. Caitlin Clark isn't a trend, she's a transformation. Aaliyah Boston isn't a sidekick, she's an anchor. Kelsey Mitchell isn't a complimentary piece, she's a closer. And when you add the shooters, the defenders, the depth, Indiana stops being a story you talk about. They become a team you have to survive. So here's the real ending. If the Fever make that championship run, this entire saga won't be remembered as a media debate. It'll be remembered as the moment women's basketball drew a line, the moment it chose growth over grudges, the moment it stopped letting personal agendas masquerade as analysis. And if you've been watching closely, you already know what's coming next. The court is going to settle what the microphones couldn't. Now tell me this, do you think Indiana is ready to win it all, or are they one move away? Drop your take. And if you want the real behind-the-scenes angles, the whispers the mainstream won't touch, and the next chapter before it hits the timeline, stay locked in with Courtside Leaks. We've got every angle covered, every leak, every backstage twist, every moment they won't show you. Hit like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share this video. Stay locked in with Courtside Leaks, your home for the truth behind the WNBA headlines.